think that over the years, I feel like women have been more accepted at proving ourselves in law enforcement. I think that they are not necessarily in every aspect of law enforcement that they could be utilized in. Trying to get on the SWAT team or SWAT teams, you have to be pretty tough, and that's great. But I think people are slowly changing their philosophy that we can bring other things to the table besides just toughness with teams and different assignments in law enforcement.
Okay, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Mynde Heil.
And can you give me a little bit of background about your law enforcement experience? But before you do that, can you talk to me a little bit about growing up? And was there anything growing up that led you into law enforcement?
I actually grew up in Twin Falls, Idaho. I was in Twin Falls for about 12 years. My parents got divorced. We then moved to Boise, Idaho for approximately a year, and then they got transferred with their job to New Jersey. So I had culture shock at about 14 or 15 and moved to New Jersey for about 8 years, and then moved back to Utah and eventually back to Twin Falls where I was born.
Okay. And any brothers and sisters?
Nope, I'm an only child.
Okay. And so would it be fair to say that you grew up here in Twin Falls?
Yes, I did.
Okay. How was that?
Sleepy little town. It was amazing, back in the 70s, late, 70s, early 80s. Could ride your bike. I grew up actually right here on Kimes Street, stay out from sunrise till sunset on your bikes, throwing rocks, playing that kind of stuff and not worried about anything to do with stranger danger or anything like that. So,
can you give the audience an idea of how big Twin Falls was when you were growing up?
I would say probably, if I had to guess, I don't know for sure, but if I had to guess, like 20,000, probably smaller.
Okay. And how about, what is it today, if you know?
It's beyond 50,000 currently.
Okay.
So.
Was there anything growing up that led you into law enforcement?
I wouldn't say as far as growing up, but when I started in law enforcement, I had moved back to Twin Falls and I had a son that was 5 years old. And I knew immediately when I moved back that Twin Falls was not the town that I grew up in. And I wanted to do my part, I guess, for lack of better terms, to make it safer for my son to grow up in.
Okay. But why law enforcement in particular? I know that females being in law enforcement, there's a little, I guess, thought process that goes in that. Other than wanting to make Twin Falls a little bit safer, was there anything else that you were thinking about?
I was very interested in the aspect of investigating. My mom and I always joke around about if we're curious or nosy. And so I've always been curious about the environment going on around me. And I've always had kind of a sense of everything that's happening around me. And I think females in general should have that skill because we have to make sure that ourselves are safe because nobody's going to do that for us. So I've always had kind of that skill about multitasking and knowing what was going on around me. So the investigative side of law enforcement, I think, is what led me initially into being curious about that.
Tell me about the process of getting hired on, and who did you end up ultimately getting hired on at first?
I initially got hired on at Twin Falls Police Department, and kind of what led me to applying for the Twin Falls Police Department is I had applied for a couple of other positions within Twin Falls City, and I was told I was overqualified for those positions. And the human resource manager at that time, her name was Susan Harris, suggested to me that she said, "Have you ever thought about going into law enforcement?" At that time, I had, back to when I was in Utah, I had kind of toyed around with the idea of being in law enforcement, but I guess at that time in my life, it was never, I guess, a convenient time to apply and go into law enforcement. So there was a job opening. I applied. Once I applied, it took approximately 6 months for me to get hired. Initially, you start with the physical tests. The physical test consists of a 1.5-mile run in a certain amount of time, 300-meter run in a certain amount of time, a cadre of push-ups, sit-ups, and a vertical jump. And you're scored according to your times and your numbers in a graph that they have, and they keep track of that.
What year do you get hired on?
I get hired on in July of 2001.
And how old are you at that point?
I'm pretty late in life. 32 is when I started with the Twin Falls Police Department.
Okay. And do you have to go to an academy here?
Yes. So you can either, at that time, you could either go to CSI and get your degree through the CSI law enforcement program, or you can go to the Peace Officer Standards and Training, which is called POST in Meridian, Idaho.
Oh, okay. And what do you end up doing?
I end up going to POST.
Okay. And how is that?
Well, I would say that because I'm later in life, it was kind of, it's very militaristic, and I would say I felt like I was in kindergarten, because at that time, the campus is locked down from Sunday at 5 p.m. until Friday at 5 p.m. So you cannot leave the campus. You eat, sleep, do all of your schooling and everything at the campus. So it's very closed down, like I said, and you study, you do all of your physical training there and everything like that. So.
And do you have any kids at the time?
Yes, I have my oldest son, Parker, and so he is at home with his stepdad, and he's at home with my stepdad and my parents.
Okay. So you graduate, you get out of post. Tell me what happens.
I actually, when we're going to post, I would also like to mention that 9/11 happens. So we're at Post Academy, 9/11 happens, and we're notified, obviously, by media coverage. And we have several people in our class that are reserve officers in the military. So they're worried about if they're going to get called to help go back into the military and help that. So fortunately, none of the officers that are in the academy with us have to go take care of that. But once I graduate, then I go back to Twin Falls Police Department. We have a mini academy. Then we get to go through 14 weeks of field training, which is it humbles you. I know that field training is very necessary, but you're graded on things that you've never done before. Like, I've never, for some guys, they've been in physical confrontations before, been in fights, that kind of thing. But I would say typically for a female that doesn't have brothers, it's not normal things for us to do is to fight with people, and be in a physical confrontation. So you're graded on whether you jump into a fight, how you handle yourself, and things of that nature. So you learn quickly that you just need to jump into stuff. And even if you don't know exactly what you're doing, you kind of fake it till you make it, I guess, for the lack of better terms.
So how was that, Mynde? Not having any brothers, obviously confrontations in general, aren't necessarily easy for men or women. But how was it for you being an only child, a female, just kind of getting into a situation where, you know, there may have been physical altercations that you needed to jump into?
I think it was, I would like to say I was kind of raised on the block here in Twin Falls with a lot of, well, everybody was guys except for me. So I was typically a tomboy at heart. So initially it was odd, but after you get your initiation, I guess, into the physical fight, it gives you a rush and you kind of enjoy it. And so I think I was kind of along those lines. I know that later on in my career, it's like I never get in physical fights anymore, and that's kind of disappointing. But you know, I think that once the taser was created, you know, people were obviously more willing to listen to officers than to get tased. So,
did you ever have any trepidation, worry of your own personal safety being a female in law enforcement?
I did not, and the reason was I never. I'm not going to say never. I tried to never be overconfident because there's always somebody bigger. There's always somebody more apt to kick your ass. And so I never was overconfident. I think my communication skills were amazing, and I think they got me out of a lot of situations.
Let me ask you about that, because obviously I think females have a much better communication skill set than males. Do you believe that? Did you see that on patrol and later on in your career?
Absolutely. I think that we are able to obviously talk about feelings more readily than our male counterparts are. And I think that communicating that to the other human beings that we dealt with made it easier for us to talk ourselves and our teammates out of situations.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about your career with Twin Falls PD. Can you give me an idea of some of the assignments that you had?
Yes. So initially, when I started out in July of 2001, I was assigned to patrol. I was on patrol for, I would say, roughly 2 years. Then I applied and went to be a school resource officer for a couple of years.
And how was that?
That was amazing. I loved working with kids. I was assigned to O'Leary Junior High School. It was a junior high at that time, not a middle school. And I loved working with the kids. I felt like it was making a difference in the community with kids and how they see police officers, more making it that we're human beings just like everyone else. Instead of, I mean, we're superheroes in some aspects, but we still have feelings and we're still humans just like everyone else. So that was very rewarding. I had the benefit of also working in the grade schools. So, you know, we're amazing to kids in grade schools, and I really enjoyed that. After I was a school resource officer, then I was a narcotics detective. That was super eye-opening and crazy all at the same time. You know, doing undercover buys and being an undercover detective, as well as developing confidential informants, doing the whole hurry up and wait thing, and being on what we termed at the time doper time was very frustrating at times, but also rewarding all at the same time.
Let me ask you a little bit about narcotics and in particular about undercover. So I'm assuming at this point you're probably about mid-30s?
Yes, correct.
And I'm assuming you were never into drugs and around that whole culture. So how did you kind of get that mindset of how you were going to go about buying drugs and basically getting as much info from the bad guys as possible?
Well, it's kind of a hit and miss. So I was always an intro to somebody and buying drugs that way. So I feel like that was a little bit easier as far as purchasing drugs from other like from dealers and things like that, and introduction by a confidential informant. So you just basically interview the confidential informant and get as much information from them as possible. And if they tell you to do something, then that's what you do, because they're living that life. So you have to listen to the people that are actually living that life. So it's almost, and I think that as police officers, we have to be good at acting. And I think it's kind of along those lines. You just have to be a good actor.
And do you have an opinion one way or another? I certainly do. Do you feel being a female undercover allowed the bad guys to drop their guard a little bit more, or it was just another day at the office?
I think it could allow them to drop their guard a little bit more, but not necessarily. Maybe in a bigger community, it wouldn't. Probably, I do think that in general, people think that undercover detectives are guys, not females, but it's just they don't think that females would be undercover detectives. So right. I think it could be a benefit, yes.
Okay. So you go from narcotics to what's the next assignment?
I go from narcotics back to patrol, and I was a field training officer.
Okay. And what is a field training officer?
So a field training officer takes brand new officers, and then we go back to the basics, making sure the officers possess the officer safety skills, that they can handle themselves in the community, that they can handle certain types of calls. Because let's be honest, unless you live in a huge city like Phoenix or New York City, you're probably not going to experience every kind of call when you're on field training. You might experience a lot of different ones, but probably not everything that you could experience in your career. So we do the best to train them thoroughly, making sure that they know how to do the mounds and mounds of aching paperwork that is necessary to do our job. And you don't realize, I think, until you're actually thrown into the situation, how much mounds of paperwork there is for everything that you do. So everything's exciting, but it's that 2 seconds of excitement for 50 hours of paperwork that you have to do.
Did you have a specific philosophy as a field training officer? I know that being a field training officer, or in terms of a mentorship type thing, is really, really important for a younger officer coming up. Did you have anything in particular that you looked for or focused on in terms of training new people coming on?
I would say that I looked for that need and want to be the best police officer that they could be, to gather the most amount of information in a short amount of time that they could actually possess and be a well-rounded police officer. I know that some people's philosophies are you have to get the most arrests or you have to get the most drugs, but my philosophy has always been you have to be well-rounded, because you're going to experience other kinds of calls for service besides just drugs and just, high risk things that happen. It was always very important to me to treat people with respect and treat them as human beings, because at the end of the day, that's what we all are.
Okay. Did you ever train anybody that you thought, this might not be the job for you?
I don't think that I trained anybody that I didn't think it was the job for them, but I had to have a discussion with a couple of them that you need to be more, you have to act like this is more important to you. Like there were some people's attitudes that were just like, meh, kind of in the middle. And it's like, do you want to work here or do you not want to work here? So you need to step it up a little bit and show the administration and this police department that you actually want to be here and that you actually want to do this job.
So let me ask you this. This is curious that we're obviously going to talk about later on in your career as well. Did you ever see a difference when you started the job and when you finally ended in law enforcement between the quality or maybe the different attitudes of this younger generation coming up wanting to be in law enforcement?
Absolutely. There was a person later in my career when I was at the Bellevue Marshal's office that we had to end up letting go because he got into law enforcement to help people, and he didn't believe in the theory that holding people accountable for their speed and issuing tickets was helping people, which blew my mind because I don't know how you can't understand that correlation, but he did not. So he definitely was not a good fit as a law enforcement officer.
Okay.
And it was weird because he was in his early 30s and he seemed almost, and I think it's an individual person. I don't usually like to generalize people, but I think it's an individual person, and he seemed very entitled.
Okay. So after you're an FTO, what's your next assignment?
After I was a field training officer, I was still on patrol. I met another officer that I worked with, and we actually ended up getting married to each other, and we ended up having a child together. So then I was assigned to dispatch for 6 months while I was pregnant with my youngest son. And dispatch, I had a new love for dispatchers because they definitely deal with a lot of crap that I don't think patrol officers understand until they actually do the job. So I have a new love for dispatchers at that point. So
okay,
always make sure you take care of your dispatchers.
And I'm assuming that obviously you do dispatching for a small amount of time, and then you go back to what's your next assignment? Patrol or?
My next assignment is back to school resource officer.
Oh, okay.
So I could have more normal hours. So I go back to school resource officer. I was then assigned to the other junior high, Robert Stewart Junior High. And even though it's only a few years later, we're talking 2003 to 2009, whole different, obviously it's only 6 years, but there's a whole different attitude from one side of the community to the other side of the community.
And that was going to be my question. I was wondering if you saw a difference between when you started as a school resource officer to several years later. Did you get, obviously there's a change in the community and views on law enforcement. Were you starting to get a little bit of pushback from the kids themselves?
Yes, from the kids themselves, but I would say primarily parents. Parents have a different attitude and they want proof of everything that's happening. We're starting to enter the adults and law enforcement no longer tell the truth kind of feeling in the world, and it's very disappointing.
So what kind of pushback were you getting from parents? Did they not, like, little Johnny did something wrong, you try and talk to the parents and they didn't believe you, type of thing?
Yes, didn't believe me, didn't believe the teachers, didn't believe the administration at the school. They want proof that X, Y, and Z happened.
Oh, that must have been fun.
Not really. But then you also, understand from dealing with the parents why the kids are the way they are.
Right. Right. And I'm assuming you, over the years that you've been in law enforcement, you've probably seen the effects of that attitude that the parents and ultimately the kids have of kind of where we are today with a lack of accountability.
Absolutely. And I think that it started a generation of it's someone else's fault. We're not going to take responsibility for X, Y, and Z happening. Parents are more worried about being friends with their children instead of raising functioning, successful parts of society. Because my philosophy is that's my job as a parent, is to raise a functioning adult that gives back to society, or at least takes care of themselves in society.
Okay. So tell me about, at some point you get assigned to ICAC. What is ICAC and what do you do?
Okay. So ICAC is Internet Crimes Against Children, and I did miss that back when I became a narcotics detective. I started in the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. And at that time, it was very small. It was myself and a detective at that time, Mike Steen. And basically, we were both, we investigated sexual abuse against children under the age of 18. And that was very disheartening. At times made me sick. We basically chatted online, both of us, as 14-year-old girls, and we would meet men in the community to have sex, basically, is what we did.
So Mynde, tell me, how do you deal with that? Because I've seen a lot of bad things in my career,
Yep.
but that is probably the worst of the worst, and I can't even imagine working those type of cases day after day. So how did you deal with that?
Thank goodness we did not necessarily work it day after day because we had other initial assignments. But it was sickening. You had to really compartmentalize your feelings and go into that acting and be that 14-year-old girl. There are things that you review on discs that you get back from the computer lab in Boise that you can't unsee. I finally had to request to be removed from the unit just because I felt like it was putting me in a dark place that I could never recover from.
And how about your partner at the time? Same thing, or was
he had moved on to a different area and actually had left the Twin Falls Police Department.
It just seems to me ICAC is not a sustainable job that you can do for years and years and years.
Absolutely not. Because people don't understand the darkness in the individuals that create the child pornography, look at the child pornography, and it's just people don't want to know about it. That is the reality. And law enforcement deals with what other humans don't want to deal with. And that's one of the things that they deal with.
So I'm curious about your own opinion about crimes against children, sex slavery, stuff like that. Where obviously we're in the middle of this movie called Sound of Freedom that's come out. Do you have an opinion of why the United States is one of the largest consumers of sex slavery and crimes against children and everything else? Why do you think that is?
My opinion as far as children go, because it's a scary issue, and I feel like we don't it's never going to affect me attitude. I don't feel like we put a high enough emphasis on children in the United States. We're supposed to take care of kids, and we're supposed to be the ones that defend kids. Yet, as my career in law enforcement, when in the state of Idaho, and I don't know how other states are, but if you take a child out of the house, you have to have a law enforcement officer do that in conjunction with health and welfare. We're the only entity that can take a child out of the house. And judges look at the information, no matter how great the information is, and put those kids right back into harm's way. I feel like the judges in society, if something hasn't been an effect for them, they don't understand it. No matter how much information you give them, no matter how much documentation you give them, if they have not been in that position, they don't understand it.
Maybe this is a difficult question for you to ask. It's more of a psychoanalyzing these predators. Do you have any opinion, though, of why these people do what they do, and in particular, why is it so much more prevalent in the United States than other countries?
They do what they do because they can. And also, statistically, they do what they do because it has most likely happened to them. And that's what we found with a lot of the predators is if you go back, it's their normal way of their life. And I've tried to explain to my family that if you don't know something, you don't know it. Or if this is the only way that you were raised and how you were raised, then you think that is normal and you think that's the way the world is. When in reality, it's not.
Okay. Twin Falls PD, either in NARCs, ICAC, school resource officer, anything. Any interesting stories, funny, concerning, any interesting stories that you can look back on that you can tell?
Lots of funny stories, but I don't know really that, like you see so many things that you're like, I couldn't make this up if I wanted to make this up. Too many of those to even go into that. But I feel like every law enforcement officer, if we wrote a book, would be super popular and people would be like, really? That really happened? It just blows your mind of how many weird things happen that you could not make up if you wanted to.
Right.
I loved working at Twin Falls Police Department, even though sometimes, just like every other job, there's good things and bad things. I loved the camaraderie of working on a squad and working with individuals that you could joke around with and, be teammates with. I really enjoyed that.
Did you run into any adversity being a female law enforcement officer? People either thinking you couldn't do something or not wanting you to do a specific thing?
I feel like not necessarily directly. There were a couple officers that I dealt with that, felt that females should be barefoot and pregnant and shouldn't be in law enforcement. But I always had the attitude that that's their problem, not my problem. And I'm just here to do the best job that I can. I do know, as far as Idaho goes, that I feel, in my opinion, I feel that law enforcement is part of the good old boys club, but that even goes into the legislature. Everything's the good old boys club. And I think that over the years, I feel like women have been more accepted at proving ourselves in law enforcement. I think that they are not necessarily in every aspect of law enforcement that they could be utilized in. Trying to get on the SWAT team or SWAT teams, you have to be pretty tough, and that's great. But I think people are slowly changing their philosophy that we can bring other things to the table besides just toughness with teams and different assignments in law enforcement.
In episode 1, I interview another female officer that I worked with, Sam Walker Gibbs, and she related that she seemed to do things and gravitate toward things that the male officers never wanted to do, as maybe a way of getting ahead, or maybe just saying, hey, you guys, I'll handle this, as opposed to you guys handling this. It seems to me, based on what you've told me so far about your career with Twin Falls PD, that you never really felt that way about your career, or is that true?
Well, I feel like I don't know if there were any other narcotics detectives at Twin Falls Police Department. I don't think there was. So I was one, and still am, I think, one of the only ones that was at Twin Falls Police Department. But things, I kind of guess that I had the attitude that if I want something, I'm going to go, and I've always been that way in my life. If I want something, I'm going to go after it, and I'm going to get it, no matter what I have to do. And I also say that I'm not going to step on people to get what I want either. I'm not one of those people, but I'm going to push myself until I get what I want. And I think that's just the attitude. You have to prove it to yourself. I think there are some females in law enforcement that they feel like they have to compete with men. I just worried about competing with myself.
Okay. 2012, 2013, you're working at Twin Falls PD. You have a little bit of a break there, and maybe talk a little bit about that break. What was going on in your life, and then 2018, you go to the Bellevue Marshals.
Correct.
Okay, so let's talk about the break first, and then ultimately how you get pulled back into law enforcement.
Okay. So I took a break. I wanted to see if I could give this stay-at-home mom thing a try, and definitely not for me. I'm not cut out to stay at home at all. I still maintain my certification in Idaho, working at the Buell Police Department as a reserve officer. Then I take a job at the State of Idaho Bureau of Occupational Licenses, and they basically maintain a bunch of different licenses for people like cosmetologists, barbers, counselors, social workers, things of that nature. So initially I did inspections. So I inspected crematoriums. I inspected salons like cosmetology establishments, barber shops, funeral homes. And then I went into the investigative part of that. So at that time, they had 32 boards that they focused on, and I would investigate any complaint that came into that agency. But that was out of my house, stay at home kind of position. I realized doing that job, even though it was investigative, I didn't have any direct contact with human beings, and I really craved that. So I kind of went from, and I'm sure other law enforcement officers, and if you had anything to do with law enforcement officers, you understand you hate people, but you like people at the same time. It's a very fine line, and I'm sure everybody understands that. So I realized doing that I missed having a purpose and being in law enforcement. So in April of 2018, I decided that I want to go back into law enforcement because I miss it. So I apply at the Bellevue Marshal's office.
Okay, before you go any farther,
okay,
let's talk about, because it's weird. Why do they call it the Bellevue Marshal's office? And you correct me if I'm wrong, But it's basically like a PD.
Yes, it is a city police department.
So why do they call it the Marshal's office?
So back when in 1880, when it was created, they were marshals in 1880 instead of police officers. So they've always kept that name because they think it sounds really great. We still are the only charter city in Idaho, which I've been told, and I really don't understand it, that if we wanted to have a brothel and gambling in our community, we could have that. But obviously we don't want to.
And Mynde, where is Bellevue?
Okay, so Bellevue is termed the gateway to the Sawtooth. So it's the first community that you get to in between Timmerman Hill. So if you go north from Twin Falls up, you go on Highway 93 north, and then once you go through Shoshone, it becomes Highway 74, and you continue north. Timmerman Hill is a rest area, and you can either go to Highway 20 or continue north. And so Bellevue is the first community you come through in the Wood River Valley.
Which, for the audience, is Sun Valley.
Correct. Sun Valley, Haley, Ketchum.
Okay.
So,
roughly, what's the population in Bellevue?
So Bellevue's population is roughly 2,700 people.
Okay.
Not very big.
How many patrol officers are currently?
Okay. Well, when I started, there was 3.
Okay.
They currently have 4 now.
Okay. So 3 or 4. Okay.
Right.
So now getting back to in 2018, I guess a position opens up, and why do you end up deciding that you want to go to Bellevue as opposed to maybe going back to Twin or some other department?
Well, I did try to go back to Twin, and they told me at that time that something in my background, which I'm not really sure what that term meant. At that time, I know that when I left the Twin Falls Police Department, I probably didn't have the best attitude when I left the police department. That may have burnt bridges. I'm not really sure. Okay. But I never really got a great answer.
So they wouldn't hire you back?
No, they wouldn't.
Wow, that's a little odd considering you worked with them for so long. Okay. All right, so I guess you start looking around and Bellevue has an opening and you end up going there.
So then I end up commuting. It does take about an hour from where I live. For a while, I did the commute back and forth, and we were working 12-hour shifts. So I would work basically 14-hour days, commuting back and forth. Once I was up there for a little bit of time, I became the assistant marshal, which is the assistant chief. We were able to talk to the local fire station that was just right outside of Bellevue. That was a BLM and a Wood River Valley fire station, and I was able to stay there. So when I was up there working, I could stay and sleep there, take a shower. And so when I was up there, I was up there.
Okay.
So that took a little less, I guess, stress on my life, so I didn't have to travel back and forth.
And at some point, you become essentially chief of police for Bellevue.
Correct.
Is that a political position? Do you have to get elected?
No. It is an appointed position, just not an elected position.
Okay, and I'm assuming the mayor appoints you?
Correct. The mayor and the city council.
Okay, so what is your thought process there? I'm assuming, based on what you did at Twin, that, and maybe this is wrong, but it never appeared to me, based on your career progression, that you had any thought of going into leadership administration. And maybe that's not right, but how does it change for you when you get to Bellevue? You're like, oh, all of a sudden I'm an assistant, and I'm assuming that you must have wanted to be chief.
Yes.
Okay.
I did, when I was in Twin Falls, I did have thoughts of becoming, I kind of was on the track to be the first female sergeant. In my opinion, what happened was because my last husband and I got married and we didn't get permission from the Twin Falls Police Department. I feel like that put a bad vibe on the administration at Twin Falls Police Department, and we couldn't work together. It kind of squashed my first female sergeant kind of thing, because then I couldn't ever be in a supervisory role over him. Once we got married, we couldn't work together. He had to work night shift and I had to work day shift. So I think because it was the first and they didn't really know how to handle it, it kind of put us on a blacklist.
A little sidetrack then. How was it being married to another law enforcement officer?
I really enjoyed it, other than we had to work. I mean, we had the same days off, but he was on night shift, I was on day shift. Definitely understood each other and where, each other was coming from. Understood the day-night shift thing that maybe other spouses, unless you're in day-night shift world, understand or don't understand. I think it just gave us a little bit different understanding of a married couple versus somebody that works like 8 to 5 Monday through Friday and, rotating schedules, etc.
Right.
So.
Okay. So let's get back to Bellevue, and you become chief of police. How is that? Well, I'm the assistant chief, obviously. How is it going from patrol to assistant chief and then to chief in terms of a leadership administration role? Kind of switching that mindset a little bit.
Right. It is a little more difficult, but kind of an anomaly that doesn't happen unless you're in a small agency is the assistant chief and or chief worked patrol along with everybody else. So we're in the regular call rotation and on a regular rotation just like everyone else. In my opinion, what happens is in bigger agencies, when you get promoted and you have more responsibility, like to captain, lieutenant, chief, you kind of have a disconnect because you're worried about other things that happen in an agency and you disconnect from what is actually happening in the nuts and bolts on patrol. So I think you still have that aspect because you're still you're worried about things that are happening on patrol, plus added stuff like your budget, your liability, training, all of that kind of stuff. So it's just added on top of patrol issues.
Did you have a high turnover rate at Bellevue?
Not, well, I would say probably along the same lines as a regular agency.
Okay.
We did struggle, just like a lot of agencies now, trying to get people to apply. And we also had an added complication of how expensive it is to live in the Wood River Valley. So when I was there as the assistant chief, we had somebody come from northern Idaho, and he took my position as the chief of police. He still lives in a fifth wheel in the RV trailer park in Bellevue because he can't afford to buy somewhere. I do need to say that it was my choice to continue to live in Twin Falls and commute because I share custody of my 13-year-old with my ex-husband. So it wasn't in my cards to move up there because there was no way I would ever see my son. So.
Okay. So can you tell the audience ultimately how you became and why you became the marshal up in Bellevue?
Yes. So in 2020, October of 2020, which I was not aware of, the marshal at the time, and his name is Ross Skaggs. I was alerted to the fact that he was doing inappropriate things while he was on duty. He was consuming alcohol, and he was also apparently using and selling edibles on duty. So basically how he got caught was a confidential informant purchased edibles from him while he was on duty.
Like in a patrol car?
Like in a patrol car.
Okay.
And the Idaho State Police subsequently arrested him after the purchase and did a search warrant on his residence. Also found out that he was actually utilizing his City of Bellevue cell phone to set up drug deals on his cell phone.
Okay.
So he was busted, and I was the interim marshal at the time, and then took over. Then I was appointed as the marshal.
Wow. So how does so you're essentially the assistant chief at that time, but how is that taking over under basically this cloud that's gone on and it's made national news and everything else? How is that?
You just kind of have to keep your head down and keep, things functioning. I was in essence doing the budget and pretty much doing the marshal's job anyway. I thought that he was just struggling with some family issues. He had previously had an accident where his neck was affected, and he was having some medical issues with that. So I just thought it was kind of chalking that all up to that. So.
Okay. And then the second thing we talked about, and for the audience, many of you may kind of remember what happened here, but this was a Bellevue officer, Bellevue marshal, that posted a TikTok video, and it was basically making fun, mocking LeBron James. I think LeBron James at the time was saying some disparaging thing about police or something, and this guy got on and made a TikTok video that went viral. And can you just kind of explain to the audience what happened?
Yes. So I worked with a police officer at Twin Falls Police Department. His name is Nate Sylvester. At the time, we needed a police officer. I reached out to Nate and asked him if he was interested in going back into law enforcement. I still to this day think that Nate is an amazing police officer. We did hire him, and while he was working for us, he was making TikTok videos. He did violate our City of Bellevue social media policy. He made a TikTok video. Basically what it was he was making fun of LeBron James because LeBron James had posted something on, and I don't know if it was tweeted or on Instagram, about the officer involved shooting that I believe killed an African American woman who was trying to attack another African American woman with a knife. And so LeBron had said something disparaging about the police officer and said something about him being next. So Nate's TikTok his videos were trying to humanize the badge, which I understand. He carried it a little too far though, because he kept posting videos while he was on duty. After the LeBron James incident, the city council and mayor wanted Nate to be fired. And I stood up for Nate in an executive session, and I said, you need to let me do my job and handle the situation. So he was put on a week unpaid leave to handle it, and he was also given a letter that basically said, this is your last chance. This is your last chance letter. If you do something to violate a policy again, you're going to be fired. All we said was you cannot make any videos while you're employed while you're on duty, basically. Lo and behold, he did that a couple of weeks later, and that's the reason that he got fired.
So it wasn't from the LeBron James video. I mean,
No.
Ultimately, you kind of stood up for him, but it was the fact that, look, Nate, you can't do this again.
Right.
And he did it anyway, and he got fired.
Correct. And so his take now is, or what he continues to go on Dr. Phil about is that how woke everything is, and he got fired because it was a political thing that the mayor fired him, and the mayor didn't fire him. It was me that fired him.
Okay. In a department that size, not that big, are you still dealing with the same concerns as a larger department chief of police in terms of mental health issues for your officers?
I think so, yes. I think that I'm so glad the stigma over the last few years has kind of lessened. So officers are encouraged to get mental health help. I think it's very necessary for officers to be physically fit as well as mentally fit, because as I said previously in the interview, we see the things that people don't want to deal with in society, and you can't unsee them. And I don't think that people, unless you have somebody in your immediate family that is in law enforcement, understand what we deal with.
Right.
And they don't want to they probably want to understand it, but we do what we do because we want to protect society and we want to protect humans.
Do you think being in law enforcement affected your family at all?
Oh, most definitely. So you get very skilled at celebrating holidays, celebrating birthdays, at other times than when they really happen. You shuffle around when you celebrate birthdays or holidays, because we work everything. We work, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I think that it affected so I've been married and divorced 3 times. It didn't affect my relationship with my first husband because I wasn't a police officer. But it has, I think, contributed to 2 other divorces, because in some form or fashion, in my opinion, I feel like working this job hardens your heart and how you view society.
And how would that translate to your relationships? And in particular, I'm curious, and again, if you don't want to answer, that's fine, but in particular, the marriage to the other law enforcement officer, when you have that relationship where you feel like kind of understands what's going on, do you think ultimately being in law enforcement finally took its toll on that relationship, or was that something totally different?
I think it was contributory. I don't think it had everything to do with the end of that relationship. I think it was definitely a factor.
Okay. Let's, I want to unpack one of the last things you mentioned. So one of the questions I always like to ask is, you were in law enforcement for essentially from 2001 till 2023. During that time, if you can look back and think about when you started till now, how did that affect your views on people?
I think overall, negatively and positively, because I view things differently now in a positive way than I did in 2001. And I think a lot of that comes with more life experience. I'm not going to say age because we don't get older, right? With more life experience and how you view things. So I think there's a lot of growing, obviously, as a human being during a 22-year stint. But you still look around you and, look at people and go, oh, this is what they're doing. Like if you see somebody, looking at cars or looking at bicycles, or, you know, my poor oldest son, he always is like, hey mom, is that kid getting ready to steal that bike, or do you think that bike's stolen? You know, because you just can't help what you think, and can't help what, you know, that gut instinct tells you.
Yeah.
So
So
I think it's good and it's bad all at the same time.
Okay. But let me just follow up a little bit, because
Okay.
you said that being in law enforcement kind of hardens your heart a little bit. I mean, obviously, you said the good and bad, but do you look at, is it always a thing where you're out looking at the worst of people, or you can kind of separate, you know, where you can?
I think now that I've retired, I think that I'm better at separating where I can. You still definitely have a different view of the world than other people do. Like, for example, my boyfriend and I went to eat brunch yesterday, and you walk into the restaurant and you start immediately assessing, you know, where everybody's at, what's going on. And, you know, I still sit where I can see the door, even after it's just something that cops do.
After you retired, do you feel it was kind of a decompression that happened with you? Are you still kind of at a high alert, or did it, once you retired, did that lower it all for you?
I think I had the added benefit of being out of law enforcement for a couple of years. I think it would definitely be different if I had continuously been in an agency for all 22 years. I think it would have probably been a little more difficult for me to just leave it behind, but it's been pretty easy. Not going to lie.
Good. Mynde, thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
345's out of service.
345, also the Bellevue Marshal's office in the city of Bellevue and dispatch would like to congratulate Marshall Mynde Heil on her retirement after 22 years of service. We wish Marshall Heil a happy and peaceful retirement.